I still remember the hiss of the kettle as if it were a starting pistol, signaling another late-night showdown between exhaustion and ambition, though back then I thought it was just a rough patch. I stood in my cramped kitchen, fluorescent light buzzing overhead, fingers numb from hours of typing code that no one would ever see, hands trembling slightly as I peeled back the foil lid of a styrofoam cup containing instant noodles. The salty steam stung my eyes and carried the familiar promise of sustenance far below any standard of nourishment. I added boiling water, pressed down the lid, and leaned against the counter, propping my elbow on the chipped laminate while I watched the noodles soften, each strand a reminder of how brittle I felt. Across the hall, the bedroom lay dark and empty. Marianne was already in bed, or maybe still at Brightforge's swanky rooftop bar with her new colleagues, swapping buzzwords and backslapping one another over deals I'd spent nights salvaging. I used to think my job as junior integration analyst was secure. I thought the late-night security audits, the vendor credential updates, the endless patching of legacy portals were appreciated behind closed doors. Everyone called me the fixer when the company's systems collapsed under their own weight. They whispered about me in private Slack channels, praising my midnight commits that patched critical vulnerabilities before anyone noticed. But in official meetings, I was invisible, my name an echo lost in corporate speak. I was junior, doomed to remain a supporting actor in a drama I had helped write. I slurped a mouthful of noodles, their bland broth reminding me of how far I'd fallen from the days when I believed hard work alone would earn respect. Back then, Marian had been my partner in everything. We infused our small apartment with laughter after tough days. We shared home-cooked meals and late-night debates about which streaming show would define the next weekend. Now, her enthusiasm was reserved for corporate functions where she wore tailored blazers and delivered PowerPoint presentations that masked her own insecurities beneath glints of confidence. Somewhere along the way, she traded our late-night conversations for late-night networking events. I watched the noodles swirl in the cup, picturing myself trapped in the tangle of code I'd been hired to manage. Spaghetti portals with undocumented APIs, half-finished security patches, ghost accounts granting admin rights to contractors long gone. Each new line of code felt like I was sewing myself into a cage. My heart stuttered when my phone buzzed with a group chat notification from Brightforge, another reminder that I was on call, that the company needed me to perform miracles so they could claim uninterrupted uptime. I pushed the cup aside, the noodles now a soggy mockery of comfort, and stared out the window at the city lights shimmering against the rainy pavement. I wondered when I had last seen Marianne's eyes really look at me, not at a screen or an audience. The silence in our apartment pressed in around me until it felt like it was suffocating me, and I realized this was no mere rough patch. It was a chasm opening beneath my feet, and I was sinking fast. I trudged back to my desk, the cold tile against my bare feet grounding me in the moment. I logged into the company portal and scrolled through error logs that stretched back days, each timestamp a testament to my burnout. My shoulders ached, my neck felt like it might snap, and still I pushed on, compelled by pride, by necessity, by the fear that leaving my post would mean admitting defeat. Yet as the clock edged past midnight, every message from Marianne's corporate group chat, every badge swipe update she broadcasted on social media, felt like a verdict pronounced against me. I was fading while she was rising, and the realization stung sharper than any jalapeno packet I could pour into my noodles. In that moment, I knew something had to give. I shut down my terminal, but my mind raced faster than any CPU. I thought about all the nights I had stayed late while she clinked champagne glasses in celebration of her promotions. I thought about the silence that greeted me when I walked through the door, the hollow space where our shared life once bloomed. I thought about the finality of a marriage that had survived layoffs and long hours only to be undone by success itself. I poured the cold noodles into the sink, watching the murky water swirl down the drain, carrying with it the small comforts I'd taken for granted. Then I grabbed my laptop and reopened LinkedIn, not to polish my profile, but to scan my network with the desperation of someone drowning who spots a life raft in the distance. Every connection, every past contractor I'd helped in a crisis, every colleague who had whispered thanks off the record now seemed like a potential salvation. And as the kettle hissed again, filling the room with steam and possibilities, I made a silent vow. I would find a way out of Brightforge's labyrinth of broken code and broken promises. I would stop waiting for recognition that never came. I would build something of my own worth, no matter how many cups of instant noodles it took. I walked into that conference room like a man who'd finally earned the right to breathe. My backpack was slung casually over one shoulder, but in my hands I held something more important than a paycheck or promotion: 14 pages of back-end cleanup, meticulously documented. Every security breach that had almost happened, every line of spaghetti code I'd untangled, every log I'd corrected and vendor account I'd resensed. I had stamped them, indexed them, printed them, and stacked them like a declaration of war. My war wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was silent, surgical, and long overdue. The room smelled like that burnt citrus hand sanitizer everyone had gotten hooked on during COVID. At the head of the table sat Marianne, my wife, my ex-wife, technically, but not yet in title. She wore her confidence like a freshly pressed suit, immaculate, tailored, and indifferent. Her nails drummed lightly on the glass table. Her eyes didn't even flick up when I stepped in. That, more than anything else, told me where I stood. Around her were the usual suspects: Greg from Ops, whose only qualification seemed to be volume, Denise from Procurement, who lived in a spreadsheet, and a few new faces I didn't recognize. One of them wore a badge labeled Consultant Omniscient. That got my attention. I wondered, briefly, if Marianne had landed the logistics contract she'd been chasing for months. I set my packet down in front of her. She glanced at it like it was junk mail. My heart thumped once hard. "This is the breakdown," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Full traceability on vendor integration. Logs are organized by access level, breach window, and mitigation route. Timelines in the appendix." It didn't take long. 10 seconds. Maybe less. She flipped the first page, barely scanned a single bullet point, then pushed the entire document back toward me with one manicured finger. Her lips curled into a smile that was all business and no warmth. The kind she used when she was about to drop a dagger disguised as feedback. "Sweetheart," she said, the word tasting like venom dressed in silk, "this isn't Shark Tank. We don't negotiate with junior staff." The moment burned in my ears. The laugh that followed from Greg was too loud, fake and forced, but enough to make the others chuckle, like dominoes of discomfort. I could feel their eyes shift away from me, trying not to get caught in the blast radius. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just let the humiliation settle on my skin like cold ash. I nodded slowly, as if I were taking notes for a performance review. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table and throw the 14 pages in her face and ask her if she remembered the night I stayed up until 4:30 a.m. patching a firewall breach while she drank martinis on a rooftop talking about cross-functional integration. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not there. Not like that. Instead, I gathered the packet with calm hands, slid it back into my folder, and clicked my pen shut. My body went into that strange autopilot that people enter when they've been publicly gutted and are expected to pretend nothing's happened. My heart was thundering, but I kept my face still, the same face I'd worn the night we both lost our second round of IVF and sat in the driveway for 20 minutes in silence. That face. The one that held everything in place while everything inside collapsed. The meeting droned on, of course. Greg gave a half-baked update on onboarding delays, blamed some ticketing system Marianne herself had approved. No one mentioned that I was the one who fixed the permissions loop they'd all ignored. No one remembered that I'd written the fail-safe protocol they were now quoting as best practice. My name never made it into the conversation, and neither did the packet. When it was over, people shuffled out like they always do, laughing, checking phones, slapping backs. Marianne didn't even glance at me as she whispered something to the omniscient guy and followed him out. Her heels clicked against the polished floor, each step another exclamation mark, punctuating my irrelevance. I stayed behind. Not long, just a minute or two. Enough time to feel the heat in my chest settle into a slow, simmering pulse. I looked at the empty chair she'd occupied, the slight indentation in the cushion, the lipstick ring on the edge of the half-empty water bottle she'd left behind. I took the water bottle and dropped it into the trash on my way out. Not out of pettiness. Out of necessity. I didn't want anything of her orbit lingering around me. Back at my desk, I stared at my monitor like it owed me something. I clicked through the backlog of tickets, each one a reminder of how much I held together with duct tape and willpower. I fixed things no one even knew were broken, prevented issues that never became emergencies because I was the emergency plan. And what did that get me? A sweetheart slap in front of the only people who should have known better. But something inside me clicked that day. Not anger. Not rage. Just clarity. I realized I didn't need validation from a room that couldn't see past my job title. I didn't need to prove anything to a woman who once vowed to build a life with me, only to bulldoze over it in pursuit of her own image. I had always been the fixer. Maybe it was time I fixed myself. As I packed my laptop that night, I took the 14-page packet with me. I didn't throw it away. I didn't shred it. I filed it into a folder labeled Foundation, because that's what it was now. Not a failed attempt at recognition, but a blueprint, a record of what I was capable of. Not for them, for me. And while the rest of the building dimmed for the evening, and Marianne probably sipped Pinot at some rooftop with a view, I rode the elevator down with a calm resolve I hadn't felt in months. The kind of resolve that builds when regret finally runs out and a new path, quiet, steady, unshakable, begins to form. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was overwhelmed or heartbroken or licking my wounds from the boardroom ambush earlier that week. No, I didn't sleep because something inside me had shifted, subtly, permanently. That laugh, that word, sweetheart, had opened a part of me I didn't know was still raw. And once the pain cleared, what was left wasn't helplessness. It was hunger. I brewed the last of my stale peppermint tea, the one box that had been sitting untouched behind the sugar for months. The kind Marianne used to say made the apartment smell like a dentist's office. I let it steep too long and sipped it anyway, bitter and lukewarm, as I opened my laptop and pulled up LinkedIn. It was like opening a door to a world I'd forgotten existed. I hadn't touched my profile in over 2 years. My photo was outdated, my title still Junior Integration Analyst, as if I hadn't grown in skill or experience despite the mess I cleaned up every quarter. I didn't bother updating anything, not yet. Instead, I did something different. I started searching names. Not random ones. Not recruiters or HR leads. I went looking for the people who remembered me not by title, but by function. Former vendors whose systems I'd rescued. Mid-level managers who once sent quiet thank you emails when I fixed things in the background. Engineers who forwarded me server logs at 1 a.m., knowing I'd catch what their team missed. I typed slowly, letting my numb fingers warm up against the keyboard as I moved from one profile to the next. And then I searched Stellan Wells. Omniscient Medical Logistics. He was one of Marianne's prized client accounts, a big fish for Bright Forge. A man whose signature could tilt a quarter's profits if his department was impressed. I remembered his name because of how often it came up in our apartment, how his email chains were printed and studied like sacred text in Marianne's team. I remembered the night his company's contract portal had almost collapsed, and I had patched it in a windowless office at 3 a.m., blind copying 2 directors on a summary report just to make sure no one could pretend it never happened. I clicked on his profile. Clean suit, no-nonsense bio, and something else, recent activity. He'd liked a post about vendor transparency and commented on an article about compliance nightmares in mid-tier tech firms. That was my wheelhouse, my hell and my playground. On impulse, I clicked connect, adding a short note. We've never officially met, but I was the one who rebuilt your contract portal from the back end last quarter. Hope things are holding up. I didn't expect a reply. Not quickly, anyway. People like Stellan were busy, and besides, I'd sent similar messages before and gotten nothing but silence. Still, it felt like lighting a flare in the night. You don't always expect rescue. You just want to be seen. I closed the laptop and sat back, watching the shadows dance across the apartment walls. Our apartment. Though now it was just mine. Marianne hadn't technically moved out yet, but her presence had faded like old wallpaper. Technically still there, but peeling at the edges, ignored and irrelevant. I thought about calling someone. A friend. My brother. But what would I say? That I'd been publicly belittled by my wife in a meeting? That I was spiraling into a void disguised as professional decorum? So I waited. Slept for a few hours. Woke up groggy and irritable. It wasn't until the following afternoon that I got the message. It came with a notification ping that felt like a spark through my chest. Your name came up during an internal review. That contract portal fix, was that you? No greeting. No fluff. Just that. I stared at the screen for a full 10 seconds before I typed back. Yes. Built and deployed the patch in February. Identified the SSL issue and rewrote the auth tokens manually after your team's integration failed against the BrightForge API. Attached the log summary to the fix, though I'm not sure it was passed on to you. I sent it and immediately regretted being so technical. But then, 3 minutes later, another message arrived. Want to meet? That was it. Not a Zoom link. Not a scheduling assistant. Just those 3 words. Like a hand reaching through the digital static and pulling me into something solid. I stared at it. Reread it. Want to meet. It wasn't a job offer. It wasn't a promise. But it was more than I'd had in months. It was acknowledgement. I accepted without hesitation. Told him I was available any time that week. He replied with a coffee shop address downtown and a time. Thursday, 11 a.m. That left me 2 days to prepare, mentally, emotionally, strategically. I didn't tell anyone. Not Marianne. Not even the one coworker I trusted in IT support, the guy who always covered for me when I needed to disappear for an hour. This wasn't about gossip. This wasn't revenge. It was rebirth. I spent those 2 days doing my job quietly, methodically. But something had changed. I no longer looked at my terminal like a prison cell. Now it was reconnaissance. I watched how credentials moved. I logged the permission requests that still trickled through broken systems. I downloaded reports that no one else had bothered to read. Every bit of data was a breadcrumb, and I was finally following the trail out of the forest. Wednesday night, I went to sleep without the weight of noodles on my stomach or bitterness in my throat. I wore a clean shirt to bed. I woke up early, shaved with care, and ironed the one blazer I had left, the one I'd worn to Marianne's sister's wedding before everything started unraveling. It still fit, though the shoulders felt heavier somehow. Or maybe I was just finally standing up straighter. I arrived 15 minutes early at the cafe, a minimalist little corner spot with glass walls and good light. Not the kind of place where people came to be seen, but where deals were quietly made over single-origin espresso. I took a table near the window, palms sweaty, heart pacing like it was back in that conference room again. Then he walked in. Stellan. Tall. Trim. The kind of guy who looked like he was born wearing confidence. But when he spotted me, he smiled. Not the tight professional smile of someone about to dismiss you, but the kind of smile that says, I've been looking for you. He shook my hand. Sat down. Ordered black coffee, nothing fancy. Then he looked at me with eyes that had seen enough nonsense to recognize when someone wasn't bluffing. I don't want an interview, he said. I nodded, unsure of where this was going. I want someone who understands how systems really work. From the inside. Who knows how they break and how to rebuild them. He leaned forward. You don't sound like an analyst. I smiled, for the first time in weeks. I'm not, I said. Not anymore. He reached into his bag and slid a folder across the table. I didn't open it immediately. I already knew what it was. Opportunity. Exit. A new path paved not with apologies, but with precision. I looked at him and asked one question. Why now? He answered simply. We're prepping for an audit, on Bright Forge. I nodded slowly. Fingers still tingling from the night, I poured tea over regret. My new path had just opened, and I was ready. I arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early, not because I was nervous, but because I needed to watch the room settle. It was a sleek little place on the corner of 9th and Alder, one of those minimalist spots with more concrete than comfort. The kind of place Marianne would have called intentional, while silently judging the folding chairs and mismatched mugs. She wasn't here. That was the point. Stellan was. He was already sitting at a back table, nursing something dark and unadorned in a simple ceramic cup. Black coffee. No cream. No sugar. No distraction. He looked up when I walked in and gave a nod, not corporate, not casual, just simple acknowledgement. That was his style. I was beginning to understand. Direct, no garnish. I ordered a latte out of habit and joined him. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. You look different on paper, he said, voice even. I raised an eyebrow. Better or worse? He cracked the ghost of a smile. Better in person. I nodded, accepting the compliment even if I didn't know what he meant. You said Bright Forge is being audited. He leaned back slightly, cup balanced between his fingers. Not officially. Not yet. But internally, yes. Our contract with them is up for review. My compliance lead flagged a number of issues. Log. Inconsistencies, credential slippage, data delays. Your name came up. That last part hit harder than I thought it would. Not just because it meant I was being seen for my work, but because it came from a system that had never acknowledged me before. Marianne had always talked about Stellan like he was a gatekeeper, a gold-plated stepping stone in her climb. And here he was, sitting across from me, treating me like an equal. I nodded. I can give you everything. Full back-end trail, documentation, patch history. I've been keeping it in a private repository since January. He raised a brow. You were documenting Brightforge failures while still working there? I was documenting the work they refused to credit. There's a difference. That got a full smile out of him. Small, controlled, but real. You don't talk like a junior analyst, he said. I'm not, I replied. Not anymore. There was a long pause between us. Just the hum of the espresso machine and the clink of mugs from behind the counter. Then he reached into his bag and slid a folder across the table. Not thick, not dramatic. Just 3 pages. An offer letter. Salary, role, start date, scope. There were numbers on it I hadn't seen in a long time. Not just a raise, a statement. Technical Systems Liaison. I read aloud, scanning the title. Fancy name, he said. Basically, I want you embedded. Omnisend systems are stable, but I don't want stable. I want resilient. Auditable. Clean. You've seen the worst. I want you to build the future. The weight of the moment didn't hit all at once. It came slowly, like warmth creeping in from frozen skin. I'd come here expecting a maybe, a feeler, some polite interest and a promise to circle back. But this was immediate, real, a lifeline that didn't just pull me out of the hole, it handed me the blueprint to build something better. I set the folder down carefully. In Brightforge. Stellan sipped his coffee. We'll give them until the end of the month. If things don't align, we terminate the agreement. But I want the audit prep before then. I want every stone turned. My breath caught. This wasn't just a new job. This was closure wrapped in opportunity. Not revenge, because revenge was personal and messy. This was cleaner, more precise. Truth, written in compliance language and timestamped evidence. You sure you're okay with me running point? I asked, careful. I don't want a corporate lapdog, he said. I want someone who knows where the bodies are buried. Someone who buried a few himself. I smirked. Fair enough. He checked his watch. Offer stands through Friday. You can take time, I'll sign today. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion but in assessment. You're not worried about how Brightforge might react? I met his gaze directly. They stopped seeing me long before I stopped working there. This isn't about reaction. It's about clarity. He nodded once. Good. We shook hands. There was no contract signing ceremony. No HR rep with a clipboard. Just 2 men at a table, making something official in the quiet way that real decisions often happen. As I walked out of the cafe, folder tucked under my arm like a badge, I noticed the exit sign hanging over the door. Red letters, glowing softly. It struck me how different it looked in that moment. Not an ending, but an invitation. An arrow pointing forward. Not away from something, but towards something else. That night, I sent my PTO request. 2 days. Enough to clear my head and prepare. I didn't tell Marianne. I didn't know her that anymore. She hadn't asked where I'd been the last few nights. We barely spoke now. The silence between us had grown roots, thick and unmoving. I used those 2 days to build a new system from scratch. At home, on my personal machine, I created a clean audit dashboard based on Brightforge's integration structure. Every weak point, every loophole I'd covered for them, mapped out in quiet, merciless detail. I wasn't planning sabotage. I was preparing truth. I titled the file Phase 0. No drama, just proof. The Friday before I started at Omnisend, I sat in the living room Marianne and I once furnished together. She was in the bedroom, scrolling through some deck on her work tablet, probably thinking about whatever new title she was eyeing next. I looked around at the life we built. It was beautiful, technically, but it had stopped being ours a long time ago. Now it was a showroom, not a home. Polished, cold, performative. She didn't ask where I'd be Monday morning. I didn't offer. That weekend, I slept. Not out of exhaustion, but because something inside me had finally let go. The chase. The begging. The need to be acknowledged by a place and a person who saw me as nothing more than a footnote. On Monday, I would walk through new glass doors. And this time, I wouldn't be carrying a resume or a smile meant to hide how tired I was. I'd be walking in with authority, with access, with direction, and maybe, just maybe, with the first real piece of myself I'd claimed in years. I didn't announce my departure with a dramatic email or a stapler slam. There was no speech, no box-clutching spectacle for the break room. I took 2 PTO days, like any other burned-out employee pretending he might come back. On the second afternoon, I sent in my resignation via HR's sluggish portal. No flair, No italics, just a plain statement. Effective immediately, I resigned from my position as junior integration analyst. The moment I clicked submit, I didn't feel free. I felt focused. Brad didn't notice. I half expected him to email asking me to pick up someone else's weekend incident tickets. Instead, he forwarded a system-wide memo about workflow, agility, and signed off with a quote from some business influencer who sold hoodies with motivational phrases. My name wasn't even mentioned in the email trail. Marianne didn't respond at all. Not even a message. Not a question about why. Not a text asking what came next. I stared at my phone for an hour waiting for a buzz that never came. I guess the woman who once curled into my side after late-night coding marathons had finally uncurled for good. When I returned my badge, I left it in an envelope at the front desk. No face-to-face goodbyes. No handshakes. Just silence. I walked out with a half-filled cardboard box under my arm and a quiet smirk on my face. That building had taken enough from me. It didn't deserve a send-off. Omnisend's office couldn't have been more different. Glass and steel, open but not empty. The people moved like they had purpose, not panic. There were no desperate status meetings or emergency fire drills masked as scrum alignment. Here, I wasn't the fixer of forgotten tasks. I was structure. Day one, they gave me access to their compliance environment. No red tape. No suspicion. Stellan met me at the elevator, handed me a branded laptop, and said, "You know what needs doing. Don't wait for permission." I nodded and got to work. My job wasn't just to clean up. It was to expose. Omnisend needed to understand where their systems had failed. More importantly, they needed to know where Brightforge had failed them. I started with the portal logs, the same ones I'd patched and silenced 6 months ago. There it was again, like an old injury aching before rain. Inconsistent credential refresh cycles, missing audit entries, and reauthorization loops that allowed third-party access days past expiration. But now, I wasn't reporting up the chain and hoping someone would care. I was the chain. I mapped it all, building a network model so clear even Greg from Ops could understand it if someone drew it in crayon. Every file I touched, I backed up. Every trace I followed, I documented. By the end of the week, I had a 42-page internal playbook with diagrams, logs, and timeline audits. I titled it Phase 0, a little nod to how far ahead I was thinking. Not Phase 1, not reaction, foundation. I didn't sensationalize anything. No angry callouts. No vendettas disguised as technical bullet points. Just the facts laid out in bulletproof structure. Expired certs. Vendor loops. Access policies that hadn't been updated since before Marian joined Brightforge. It was like a graveyard of neglect, and I was the one mapping the tombstones. The thing was, this wasn't just about pointing fingers. It was about control. I had spent too long reacting. Putting out fires I didn't start, pretending I was lucky to be invited to the table even when I built the damn table from spare parts. Not anymore. As the days passed, I saw my name being CC'd on decision threads. I was pulled into vendor calls, not as support but as oversight. People started asking, "What does he think?" instead of, "Can he implement this?" My voice had weight now. Authority didn't hang on a title anymore. It was earned, and I had receipts. And Brightforge? I knew their systems better than they did. I knew which processes they'd cut corners on. I knew which contractors they failed to vet. And I knew how vulnerable they really were, beneath all their acronyms and buzzwords. They hadn't changed a thing since I left, because they didn't think they had to. Until now. I compiled everything, neatly, professionally, into a shared folder. I named it Omnisend Internal Review, dated and versioned. At the top, I attached a note, summary. Critical vendor systems at risk due to outdated credential policies, poor access control, and neglected audit practices. All issues originated from Brightforge integration structure. See attached for logs, schema comparison, and alternative build recommendations. No emotion. No vendetta. Just accountability, fully armed. At night, I walked home lighter. I ate real food again. Not takeout hunched over a desk. Not instant noodles swimming in regret. I started listening to jazz again while I coded, something I hadn't done since my early 20s. And on Friday night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I slept. Deeply. No anxiety about being paged at 2 a.m. No nightmares about Marianne's voice in that boardroom, twisting my work into a joke. No fear that I was wasting my life building things only to have someone else take credit. This wasn't just a new job. It was the rebuild. And this time, I was designing the foundation on my own terms. I didn't burn anything down. I didn't scream or send angry emails or slam any doors. But what I was building, it was louder than all of that. Because I wasn't planning a revenge arc. I was executing a systems update. And Brightforge was about to find out they'd been running on an old version of me far too long. Monday came dressed in navy. My new tailored suit hugged my shoulders like armor, the kind of suit you wear when you know the ground you're about to step on used to swallow you whole. The morning air was crisp, just cool enough to sharpen my focus. I stood outside Brightforge's glass-paneled facade and let the moment stretch. Not for drama, this wasn't about theatrics, but because I wanted to feel it. This was the place that once drained me dry, ignored my voice, laughed at my efforts. And now, I was walking back in not as an employee, but as the reckoning they didn't see coming. The front desk receptionist, Amelia, looked up with a smile that faltered halfway when she saw my face. "Visitor?" she asked, glancing toward the check-in tablet. "Graham Sloan," I said, slow and steady. "Here on behalf of Omniscient." Her eyes widened slightly. She'd seen me 100 times before, passing through in hoodie and backpack, eyes downcast, shoulders bent. Today I wore authority like cologne, subtle but undeniable. She printed my guest badge without another word. I stepped into the lobby and immediately caught sight of her, Marianne. She was across the atrium, phone in one hand, talking fast, gesturing with the other like she was conducting a silent orchestra of urgency. When she spotted me, her expression cracked just a little. A blink. A pause. She lowered the phone. "Graham," she said, like she couldn't trust her own eyes. I kept walking. Calm. Professional. My Omniscient-branded laptop bag over one shoulder, badge clipped square on my chest. "I'm here for the audit," I said, and kept going before she could find words. Behind me, I could feel her trying to recalibrate. I imagined her fingers twitching toward her phone, wondering who approved this, who scheduled this, how I got into the building. She didn't know yet. That was the best part. Because I wasn't just here as a consultant. I was leading the review. With full authority. Stellan had made that crystal clear. The glass-walled conference room was already prepared when I arrived. Fresh water. Clean markers. A projector set up waiting for my files. Greg Tanner, Director of Ops, and all-around ego in khakis, was already inside. He looked up and went pale the moment he saw me. I watched the coffee cup in his hand shake just enough for a dark drop to hit the edge of the table. "You," he said, not bothering to mask his irritation. "What are you?" "I'll be running point on the Omniscient compliance review," I said as I set my laptop down. Stellan thought it would be helpful to have someone who's already intimately familiar with your systems. I took the head seat. No hesitation. No apology. Greg looked like he was swallowing a stone. "You don't have. You're not authorized to." "I am," I interrupted. "Fully. Signed off by Omniscient's internal audit team. Documentation attached in your inbox, including escalation protocols and review phases. You'll want to familiarize yourself with them." Before he could respond, 2 more Brightforge reps walked in, procurement lead and a junior PM I vaguely remembered from Marianne's team. They froze when they saw me. I could see it, the slow dread curling around the edges of their professionalism. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just opened my laptop, connected to the projector, and brought up the first slide. "Let's begin with vendor credential history," I said. 12 months back. A familiar tension fell across the room. I watched them adjust in their chairs, try to keep their eyes neutral. But it was too late for pretense. They weren't in control anymore. I was. Slide 1. Outdated SSL certificates that hadn't been rotated in 14 months. Slide 2. A spreadsheet. Actually titled Vendor Access. Final v3.xlsx, containing credential notes, some plain text passwords, and no access logs. The file had been last edited by an intern. No version control. No encryption. And worst of all, no accountability. Greg shifted uncomfortably. "We've been addressing those issues. They were isolated, except they weren't," I said calmly. "We traced similar errors in 4 different vendor accounts. Same access cycle. Same gaps. Same oversight." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The data spoke louder than any accusation ever could. Halfway through the meeting, Marianne slipped into the room. She didn't sit. She stood near the back, arms crossed, jaw tight. She hadn't been invited to this session, but someone must have tipped her off. I ignored her presence until the moment came. Slide 8. "Here," I said, clicking to a permissions map that showed overlapping admin roles between contractor credentials. This was signed off by business ops. The routing logs show that approval came from Marianne's account. A pause. She blinked. That's incorrect, she said finally. No, I said, turning. It's not. I clicked to the next page and exported authorization log. Timestamped. Digitally signed. Undeniable. Greg opened his mouth to interject, but I kept going. These aren't errors. They're patterns. Repeated, traceable, and documented. The silence that followed was the kind that sinks deep into people's bones. The kind of silence that hisses louder than shouting. No one knew where to look. Not at me. Not at Marianne. Especially not at the screen. I closed the laptop slowly, folding my hands on the table. Omnisend's compliance team will follow up with an official summary, I said. This is phase 1. We'll be running a deeper systems probe next week, and I'll require full access to the sandbox environment. I stood. We'll coordinate timelines through my team. Please be prompt. Delays will be noted. And with that, I walked out. I didn't look back. In the elevator, I caught my reflection in the mirror-polished wall. I looked still. Not smug. Not vengeful. Just clear. I had spent years inside that building thinking I needed to prove myself to be seen. Now, they couldn't look away. Outside, the air tasted sharper. Lighter. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until it rushed out of me in a single slow exhale. This wasn't just about Marianne. It was about every time I was overlooked, dismissed, undercut. It was about stepping back into the place where I was forgotten and reclaiming something I hadn't known was mine to take. Control. Power. My name, spoken in full. By Wednesday, the building reeked of panic. Not visibly, of course. No sirens, no open accusations, just a heavy air of quiet dread coating every hallway like invisible static. You could feel it in the way people stopped mid-sentence when I passed. In the shuffle of folders held too tight, in the nervous clearing of throats when I entered a room. Brightforge was bleeding, and only a few of them knew it. The others still thought they had a bandage big enough to hide it. They didn't. Greg tried to maintain his usual bravado, tossing around buzzwords like isolated instances and contextual variances in every meeting. But the way he avoided eye contact said everything. Every time I plugged my laptop into the projector, the entire table braced for impact. Not because I was loud, but because the numbers weren't. They were precise. They were clean. And they told a story that couldn't be interrupted. Monday had been compliance credentials. Tuesday was endpoint security. Wednesday, I brought the hammer. I opened with a spreadsheet, innocuous looking to anyone who didn't understand what they were seeing. A plain Excel file with a deceptively innocent name, vendor_access_final_v3.xlsx. The versioning told me everything. The third final was a lie in capital letters. This was not a system being managed. It was one being constantly patched with the equivalent of duct tape and crossed fingers. Let's walk through this together, I said, already projecting the file on the wall behind me. Rows of credentials, outdated expiration dates, repeated usernames, and worst of all, unrestricted access fields. I highlighted one in particular, an entry labeled admin_vendor_general, used across 3 separate external portals, each from a different third-party vendor, none of which had individual tracking. The last login? 6 months ago. The account? Still active. Denise, the compliance lead, swallowed hard. Was that supposed to be deactivated after the Q1 cleanup? I nodded slowly. It was. Greg jumped in. Okay, but let's not turn this into a witch hunt. It's not a hunt, I said, cutting him off. It's an autopsy. That silenced the room. I watched as they turned toward me, discomfort slowly shifting into realization. We're not dealing with one broken file, I continued. We're dealing with a culture of lazy patchwork. Files like these are a symptom, not the disease. Ghost accounts, credential reuse, inconsistent access logs. Brightforge hasn't been maintaining system integrity. It's been fabricating the illusion of control. Greg huffed. Those accounts never led to a breach. I stared at him for a long, steady moment. How would you know? His mouth opened. Closed. Nothing came out. I clicked to the next slide, access logs. Dozens of entries tied to the same account, used at irregular hours, across multiple locations. Some showed simultaneous logins from different IP ranges. Impossible, unless that credential had been shared, copied, or worse, compromised. I let the silence hang before speaking again. If this audit had been external, you'd be explaining to a regulatory board why a critical vendor account was being used from Taiwan, Denver, and Newark simultaneously. And you wouldn't just be answering for policy, you'd be answering for negligence. Greg sat back, arms crossed, but wilting fast. I turned to Denise. The only reason Omnisend hasn't already pulled the plug is because I'm here. Because we're giving you a chance to correct this before it reaches federal ears. That landed hard. Across the table, I noticed Marian hadn't moved. She was seated stiffly, legs crossed, one hand over the other, face unreadable. But her foot tapped lightly, an old habit of hers when she felt exposed. I remembered that same rhythm from nights she defended a budget she hadn't fully prepared. She wasn't in control now, and she knew it. I switched to the final document, a summary memo I'd written at 2 a.m. the night before. 3 major areas of noncompliance. I read. 1. Use of outdated, untracked vendor credentials across integrated platforms. 2. Failure to archive access logs in accordance with internal policies. 3. Willful misreporting of internal audits by rerouting alerts to a deprecated Slack channel. Greg leaned forward. Hold on, what Slack channel? I turned to him. One that hasn't been active in over a year. But your audit bot was still posting there. Denise muttered a curse under her breath. Greg just stared, mouth half open, trying to piece together how much of this had been broken and for how long. The problem was, it had always been broken. They'd just gotten too good at pretending it wasn't. I suggest pausing all third-party data syncs until these are addressed, I said, and notifying internal systems that compliance teams will be issuing updated credentials. Greg shifted in his chair, muttering something about timelines. But no one was listening. The memo had already been forwarded. The screen had already been captured. It was out of their hands now. When the meeting adjourned, people filed out slowly. Marianne stayed seated. I waited until the room was nearly empty before packing up. As I zipped my laptop bag, I could feel her staring at me. You documented all of this, she said softly, finally breaking the silence. Even before you left. I looked at her. I did. Why? The question sounded genuine. Or maybe just desperate. I paused for a long moment before answering. Because I knew, eventually, I'd need proof. Not for revenge. Not even for vindication. Just to remind myself I wasn't crazy. She looked down at her lap. No retort. No defense. I stood and shouldered my bag. It was never about being right, Marianne. It was about being treated like I was there. She didn't follow me when I left. In the hallway, I passed a junior associate who nodded at me with wide, uncertain eyes. It was the kind of nod people give to the person they've only heard stories about. The man who was once invisible, now undeniable. Back at the hotel that evening, I reviewed the logs again. Not because I didn't trust my own work, but because I knew tomorrow would bring the fallout. The pressure. The questions. And I needed to be ready. This wasn't over. Brightforge wasn't just bleeding. It was hemorrhaging. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one holding the gauze. I was the one writing the report. Thursday morning, I opened my inbox and saw it sitting there like an uninvited ghost. Subject. Would love to reconnect and explore collaboration opportunities. Sent at 6:42 a.m., just early enough to imply strategic intent. Just vague enough to pretend nothing had happened. It was from Marianne. I stared at the message for a full 60 seconds, sipping coffee gone cold in my hands. No greeting, no apology, no hint of what she was actually asking for. Just that polished corporate tone she used when she wanted to pretend the past didn't exist. As if we hadn't sat on opposite ends of a table 3 days ago while I dismantled the lies holding her job together. I clicked, reply. No hesitation. My rate is 6x. Weekly. Non-refundable. Paid up front. Then I clicked send and shut the lid of my laptop. I didn't expect a response, and I didn't need one. The message wasn't really for her. It was for me. A final line drawn in ink. Whatever favor she thought she could pull from the old version of me no longer existed. I wasn't the man holding noodles and burnout anymore. I was the storm walking calmly through the halls she thought she owned. She never replied, but others did. By noon, I'd received 3 DMs from current Brightforge employees. One was a junior analyst who remembered the onboarding module I'd rebuilt in secret. Another was a support rep I'd once covered for when her system crashed during her first month. The third was an intern, Maya. She'd been the one who inherited the infamous final_v3.xlsx spreadsheet. Her message was short. Is it true you left and came back to audit the place? If so, do you have room on your team? That one made me pause. I hadn't built a team. Not yet. But I had the influence now. At Omnisend, they trusted me with more than code. They trusted me with vision. And what I was building wasn't just a cleaner system, it was a smarter one. One that needed people who had seen the belly of dysfunction and still believed in getting things right. I replied to Maya first. I remember your intern project. You caught a recursion error no one else flagged. I always noticed. Let's talk. Then I dug into my old folders. Every log I'd kept. Every thread I'd archived. Every name I'd remembered from nights spent fixing things no one acknowledged. Some of them were still at Brightforge. Others had already jumped ship. But most of them were like me once, overlooked, overworked, and barely holding the weight of systems built by people who didn't care. I made a list, and I gave it a name, the Quiet Builders. People who never raised their voices because they were too busy doing the work. People who never got the credit because they were too reliable to fail publicly. I was one of them. I still was. But now, I had the power to pull them into something better. By the end of the day, I had 5 names flagged. 3 had already replied. 1 sent me a resume with a note. I didn't know it was okay to walk away until I saw you do it. I didn't know how to reply to that at first. Then I realized I didn't have to say much. It is. Let's build something real. Back at Omnisend, Stellan called me into a small meeting room just as I was wrapping up my systems review notes. He handed me a slim folder with the Omnisend crest stamped in black foil on the front. Your sandbox project got greenlit, he said, leaning against the table. We want to see what happens when you build the structure from scratch. Your process. Your hires. Clean slate. No legacy code. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with that sharp clarity that comes when you realize the next step isn't uphill anymore. It's forward. You're giving me a team, I said, just to hear it out loud. I'm giving you autonomy, he corrected. You earned it. I opened the folder. Budget. Timeline. Scope. All mine to shape. I thought of all the doors I'd walked through at Brightforge, doors that closed behind me, doors I was never meant to open, doors where people smiled just long enough to shut me out. Now I had my own. That night, I stayed late, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I drafted a framework for what would become my new department. Not just integration, not just compliance, something broader. A unit dedicated to systemic resilience. I called it Foundry. A place where systems are reforged, not just patched. Where people were empowered, not buried. I emailed Maya again and asked if she wanted to help design the onboarding flow. I knew she would say yes. People like her were just waiting for someone to see them. Just before midnight, I reopened Marianne's email one last time. Would love to reconnect and explore collaboration opportunities. I clicked Archive, not Delete, because I didn't want to erase it. I wanted to remember what it looked like when someone who tried to bury you came knocking for your help. The next morning, I walked into the Omnisend offices and passed by a conference room where 2 senior managers were debating portal integration metrics. One of them spotted me and stood a little straighter. Graham, he said. Got a minute? I smiled. I always have a minute for builders. And I meant it. Because now I wasn't just fixing what was broken. I was building what came next. And for the first time in years, the door I walked through actually belonged to me. Tuesday, 10:02 a.m. I remember the exact time because it happened so fast and so quietly. It felt like a power outage. No sparks, no boom. Just the cold, unmistakable shift when everything stops working. I was halfway through an integration outline for Omnisend's new vendor framework when my inbox pinged. It wasn't a CC or a reply all chain or a red flagged request. Just one clean, surgical email. Subject: Termination of vendor agreement message, effective immediately due to repeated non-compliance. All support suspended. 2 lines. That's all it took to sever Brightforge from the last real contract keeping their systems afloat. I read it once, then again, then leaned back in my chair and breathed out slow, steady, final. The impact didn't explode. It rippled. First in Slack, messages about error codes and connectivity failures. Then in Brightforge support channels. Calls bounced, login credentials rejected, APIs refusing to handshake. The systems that I'd once held together with caffeine and midnight updates were finally collapsing under their own neglected weight. And I wasn't there to catch them this time. By 10:15 a.m., Brad's name disappeared from Slack. Not just offline, gone. Deleted. His profile removed, his title scrubbed. Word spread fast. He'd stepped down to pursue new opportunities, which, in corporate code, meant thrown overboard to stop the bleeding. Greg wasn't much better. Around 11 o'clock, someone forwarded me a LinkedIn update he'd just posted. A smiling photo of him holding coffee in a co-working space captioned, "Excited to begin my journey into fractional consulting and strategy alignment." I almost laughed. It was too clean, too rehearsed. The post of a man who'd been hit by a freight train and wanted the world to think he meant to lie on the tracks. But Marianne? She was silent. No email. No social post. No frantic attempts at spin. Nothing. Until 2:45 p.m. That's when I got the call. "Conference room 4C, Stellan said. "She's here." My heart didn't race. My palms didn't sweat. I simply stood, straightened my jacket, and walked toward the room. The same hallway I'd once dragged myself down every morning with a dead laptop in one hand and a lukewarm bagel in the other now felt like a runway. Each step sharp, deliberate, like I was stepping into a moment I'd already rehearsed 1,000 times in silence. She was already seated when I entered. Alone. No laptop. No notes. Just Marianne in a dark gray blazer, hands folded tightly in front of her. Her eyes found mine immediately, searching for something softness, maybe. Familiarity. I gave her neither. I sat across from her and placed a slim folder on the table. She glanced at it, but didn't reach. "What is this?" she asked, voice thinner than I remembered. "Compliance report," I replied. "Omniscient internal review summary. Phase 3 findings." "I'm not the director of ops," she said. "Greg was. You were the business operations manager," I said, cutting her off, calm but firm. "Your name appears in multiple authorization workflows. You signed off on internal credential procedures that failed to meet audit standards. You rerouted breach alerts to a deprecated Slack channel. You vouched for system integrity during vendor renewal negotiations. That folder details every instance." She didn't argue, didn't even blink. Instead, she asked quietly, "Are they recommending dismissal?" I opened the folder. Page 2. Her name, printed clearly under a section titled Personnel Recommendations. Status: high-risk oversight contributor. Action: recommended dismissal. Barred from future vendor negotiation roles pending corrective action and retraining. She read it slowly, lips tightening around the edges. "I see," she said. I let the silence stretch between us. I didn't want to gloat. I wasn't here for that. But I also wasn't going to save her. "You knew the systems were broken," I said finally. "You knew, and you chose the optics instead of the fix. You sold stability with numbers I gave you. And when I asked for credit, you called me sweetheart in front of a room full of people who treated me like furniture." She swallowed hard. I was under pressure. "Greg, you could have said my name," I interrupted. "Even once." "You didn't." You let them laugh. Her eyes flashed. "You think this is revenge?" "No," I said. "Revenge is petty. This is accountability." She reached for the folder with shaking fingers and pulled it closer. I could see the weight of it in her expression, not the thickness of the report, but the fact that every sentence inside it had been built with the silence she helped enforce. "We were partners once," she said, almost a whisper. I nodded. "We were. Do you really hate me now?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at her, not the suit, not the title, not the power she once wielded. Just her. The woman I used to make ramen for at 1 a.m., the one who used to edit my late-night bug reports while sitting barefoot on the kitchen counter. "No," I said finally. "I don't hate you." She looked relieved for a moment. "But I also don't owe you anything." The relief faded. I stood and picked up my laptop, sliding it into my bag. "This isn't personal," I said. "This is just the moment where truth arrives and sits down across from you." She didn't follow me when I walked out. She stayed in that chair, folder in front of her, the same seat I used to take in meetings where my name never made it into the minutes. I walked past the front desk, down the marble-tiled hallways, through the glass exit doors of Bright Forge one final time. And as I stepped outside into the sunlight, I felt it. Not triumph, not victory, just peace. Because justice doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes in a 2-line email, and the sound of your own footsteps walking away. She was already seated when I walked into the boardroom, her blazer stiff, her posture straighter than I'd seen in months. But her eyes? They weren't hiding anything anymore. There was no flash of superiority, no trace of the smug smile she used to wear like perfume. Just a woman looking at the man she'd once dismissed, across the same table where she had turned me into a joke. I didn't take my old seat. I took hers. It wasn't petty. It was intentional. A subtle correction in a world that had run on her assumptions for too long. I placed the compliance folder on the table in front of her, flipped open to page 2, and waited. Her eyes flicked down to the highlighted section. Her name, bold under the subheader, recommendation for dismissal. The details were meticulous. Timestamps, screenshots, digital signatures. Every mistake signed, sealed, and now delivered. She reached out slowly, fingers trembling just enough to make the paper crinkle as she turned the page. This is permanent. I didn't blink. This goes to Omnisend's legal team at noon. Once filed, it becomes part of the final audit archive. Any vendor pulling your name in a compliance background check will see it. She closed the folder softly, her lips parting like she wanted to find the right words, the right excuse, maybe even the right tone. But there were no more presentations to charm, no more boardrooms to command. Not here. Not with me. I never meant to. Don't, I said, not unkindly. Don't rewrite it. You meant every word, every silence, every laugh. She flinched at that, barely. I leaned forward slightly, folding my hands. You thought I was background, a man who could hold your stress and your systems. You underestimated me because you needed someone to stand behind you so your light looked brighter. She looked down, her voice almost a whisper. I thought I could fix it later. After the promotion. After the Omnisend deal closed. I nodded. And you did. You tried. Her eyes met mine. I got your email, I said. The reconnect one. I just thought maybe we could still build something, she said. I smiled, not cruelly, not bitterly, just with quiet understanding. We are, just not together. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Marion never cried when she lost. She calculated. I saw the flicker of it even now, her brain working angles, spinning this into something recoverable. We could talk, she offered, softer now. Privately, off the record. I tapped the folder gently. This is the record. A long silence stretched between us. Finally, I stood, collected my laptop, and adjusted the cuff of my blazer. As I turned to go, I paused, hand resting on the chair I'd once filled for too many forgotten meetings. You once said, we don't negotiate with junior staff, I said, my voice calm and measured. You were wrong. She blinked. We do negotiate now, I continued. Just not with people like you. And then I walked out, each step light and steady, leaving behind the only negotiation that ever mattered, one where I no longer had to prove my value, because I'd already won, quietly, completely, by simply becoming everything she didn't see coming.